The title of this book. The title of this book, Gynecology, says exactly what I mean it to say. Quote, Ecology is about the complex web of interrelationships between organisms and their environment. In her book, Le Feminisme à la Mort, Françoise de Ubon coins the expression, quote, ecofeminisme. She maintains that the fate of the human species and of the planet is at stake, and that no male-led, quote, revolution will counteract the horrors of overpopulation and destruction of natural resources. I share the same basic premise, but my approach and emphasis are different. Although I am concerned with all forms of pollution in phallotechnic society, this book is primarily concerned with the mind/spirit/body pollution inflicted through patriarchal myth and language on all levels. These levels range from styles of grammar to styles of glamour, from religious myth to dirty jokes, from theological hymns honoring the, quote, real presence of Christ, to commercial cooing of Coca-Cola as the, quote, real thing, from dogmatic doctrines about the, quote, divine host to doctored ingredient labeling of Hostess cupcakes, from subliminal ads to, quote, sublime art. Phallic myth and language generate, legitimate, and mask the material pollution that threatens to terminate all sentient life on this planet. The title, Gynecology, is a way of wrenching back some word power. The fact that most gynecologists are males is, in itself, a colossal comment on, quote, our society. It is a symptom and example of male control over women, and over language, and a clue to the extent of this control. Add this to the fact noted by Adrian Rich of, quote, a certain indifference and fatalism toward the diseases of women, which persists to this day in the male gynecological and surgical professions, end quote. And add to this the fact that the self-appointed soul doctors, mind doctors, and body doctors who, quote, specialize in women are perpetrators of iatrogenic disease. That is, soul doctors, priests and gurus, mind doctors, psychiatrists, admin, and academics, and body doctors, physicians, and fashion designers, are by professional code causes of disease in women and hostile to female well-being. Gynecologists fixate upon what they do not have, upon what they themselves cannot do. For this reason, they epitomize and symbolize the practitioners of other patriarchal ologies, and they provide important clues to the demonic patterns common to the labor of all of these. In their frantic fixation upon what they lack, biophilic energy, and in their fanatic indifference to the destruction they wreak upon the other, women and, quote, Mother Nature, the phallic ologies coalesce. Their corporate merger is the mystical body of knowledge, which is gynocidal gynecology. Note that the Oxford Dictionary defines gynecology as, quote, that department of medical science which treats the functions and diseases peculiar to women, also loosely the science of womankind, end quote. I am using the term gynecology very loosely, that is, freely, to describe the science that is the process of knowing, of, quote, loose women, who choose to be subjects and not mere objects of inquiry. Gynecology is by and about women amazing all the male-authored, quote, sciences of womankind, and weaving world tapestries of our own kind. That is, it is about discovering, developing the complex web of living/loving relationships of our own kind. It is about women living, loving, creating ourselves, our cosmos. It is dispossessing ourselves and spiriting ourselves, hearing the call of the wild, naming our wisdom, spinning and weaving world tapestries of our genesis and demise. In contrast to gynecology, which depends upon fixation and dismemberment, gynecology affirms everything that is connected. Since, quote, ologies are generally static, quote, bodies of knowledge, it might at first glance seem that the name gynecology clashes with the theme of the journey. However, a close analysis unveils the fact that this is not so. For women can recognize the powerful and multidimensional gynocentric symbolism of the, quote, O. It represents the power of our moving and circling presence, which can make non-being sink back into itself. Our, quote, O is totally other than, quote, nothing, a fact demonically distorted and reversed in the pornographic novel The Story of Zero. As Denise Connors has pointed out, it can be taken to represent our aura, our ozone. Within this anti-pollutant, purifying, moving ozone, the aura of gynocentric consciousness, life-loving feminists have the power to affirm the basic gynecological principle that everything is connected with everything else. This is a holistic process of knowing that can make gynecology the ology of all ologies, and circling them, spinning around and through them, unmasking their emptiness. As the ology of all ologies, gynecology can reduce their pretentious facades to zero. It can free the flow of their, quote, courses and overcome their necrophilic circles, their self-enclosed processions, through spiraling creative process. It is women's own gynecology that can break the brokenness of the, quote, fields, deriding their borders and boundaries, changing the nouns of knowledge into verbs of knowing. The subtitle of this book. By the subtitle, The Metaethics of Radical Feminism, I intend to convey that this book is concerned with the background, most specifically of language and myth, which is disguised by the father's foreground fixations. Merriam-Webster gives as one of the definitions of the prefix meta, quote, of a higher logical type, in nouns formed from names of disciplines, and designating new but related disciplines, such as can deal critically with the nature, structure, or behavior of the original ones. Meta-language, meta-theory, meta-system, end quote. Despite the dullness of dictionary diction, there are clues here. I would say that radical feminist metaethics is of a deeper intuitive type than, quote, ethics. The latter, generally written from one of several but basically the same patriarchal perspectives, works out of hidden agendas concealed in the texture of language, buried in mythic reversals, which control, quote, logic most powerfully because unacknowledged. Thus, for theologians and philosophers, Eastern and Western, and particularly for ethicists, woman-identified women do not exist. The metaethics of radical feminism seeks to uncover the background of such logic, as women ourselves move into the background of this background. In this sense, it can be called, quote, of a higher, read deeper, logical type, end quote. It is, of course, a new discipline that, quote, deals critically with the nature, structure, and behavior of ethics and ethicists. It is able to do this because our primary concern is not male ethics and/or ethicists, but our own journeying. This book has to do with the mysteries of good and evil. To name it a, quote, feminist ethics might be a clue, but it would also be misleading, pointing only to foreground problems. It would be something like arguing for, quote, equal rights in a society whose very existence depends upon inequality, that is, upon the possession of female energy by men. The spring into free space, which is woman-identified consciousness, involves a veritable mental/behavioral mutation. The phallocratic categorizations of, quote, good and, quote, evil no longer apply when women honor women, when we become honorable to ourselves. As Barbara Sturrett wrote, we are developing something like a new organ of the mind. This development both causes and affects qualitative leaping through galaxies of mind space. It involves a new faculty and process of valuation. None of the dreary ethical texts, from those of Aristotle down to Paul Ramsey and Joseph Fletcher, can speak to the infinitely expanding universe of what Emily Culpeper has named, quote, gynergy. Indeed, the texts of phallocratic ethicists function in the same manner as pornography, legitimating the institutions which degrade women's being. Gynecological metaethics, in contrast to all of this, functions to affirm the deep dynamics of female being. It is gynography. There are, of course, male-authored, male-identified works, which purport to deal with, quote, meta-ethics. In relation to these, gynography is meta-ethical. For while male metaethics claims to be, quote, the study of ethical theories as distinguished from the study of moral and ethical conduct itself, end quote, it remains essentially male-authored and male-identified theory about theory. Moreover, it is only theory about, quote, ethical theories, an enterprise which promises boundless boringness. In contrast to this, gynecology is hardly, quote, metaethical, in the sense of masturbatory meditations by ethicists upon their own emissions. Rather, we recognize that the essential omission of these emissions is of our own life/freedom. In the name of our life/freedom, feminist metaethics omits seminal omissions. In making this metapatriarchal leap into our own background, feminists are hearing/naming the immortal Metis, goddess of wisdom, who presided over all knowledge. In patriarchal myth, she was swallowed by Zeus when she was pregnant with Athena. Zeus claimed that Metis counseled him from inside his belly. In any case, the Greeks began ascribing wisdom to this prototype of male cannibalism. We must remember that Metis was originally the parthenogenic mother of Athena. After Athena was, quote, reborn from the head of Zeus, her single, quote, parent, she became Zeus's obedient mouthpiece. She became totally male-identified, employing priests, not priestesses, urging men on in battle, siding against women consistently. Radical feminist metaethics means moving past this puppet of Papa, discovering the immortal Metis. It also means discovering the parthenogenic daughter, the original Athena, whose loyalty is to her own kind, whose science/wisdom is of womankind. In this discovering, there can be what Catherine Nicholson named, quote, the third birth of Athena. As this happens, Athena will shuck off her robothood, will return to her real source, to herself, leaving the demented male mother to play impotently with his malfunctioning machine, his dutiful dim-witted, quote, daughter, his broken baby doll gone berserk, his failed fembot. The metaethics of radical feminism means simply that while Zeus, Yahweh, and all other divine male, quote, mothers are trying to retrieve their dolls from the ash can of patriarchal creation, women on our own journey are discovering Metis and the third-born Athena, our own new being. That is, we are being in the triple goddess, who is and is not yet. The tradition of this book, hagiography. Hagiography is a term employed by Christians, and is defined as, quote, the biography of saints, saints' lives, biography of an idealizing or idolizing character, end quote. Hagiology has a similar meaning. It is a, quote, description of sacred writings or sacred persons. Both of these terms are from the Greek hagios, meaning holy. Surviving moving women can hardly look to the masochistic martyrs of pseudo-spiritual religion as models. Since most patriarchal writing that purports to deal with women is pornography or hagiography, which amount to the same thing, women in a world from which woman-identified writing has been eliminated are trying to break away from these moldy, quote, models, both of writing and living. Our four-sisters were the great hags, whom the institutionally powerful but privately impotent patriarchs found too threatening for coexistence, and whom historians erase. Hag is from an Old English word meaning harpy, witch. Webster's gives as the first and, quote, archaic meaning of hag, quote, a female demon, fury, harpy, end quote. It also formerly meant, quote, an evil or frightening spirit, end quote. Lest this sound too negative, we should ask the relevant questions. Quote, evil, by whose definition? Quote, frightening, to whom? A third archaic definition of hag is, quote, nightmare. The important question is, whose nightmare? Hag is also defined as, quote, an ugly or evil-looking old woman. But this, considering the source, may be considered as a compliment, for the beauty of strong creative women is, quote, ugly, by misogynistic standards of, beauty. The look of female-identified women is, evil to those who fear us. As for, old, ageism is a feature of phallic society. For women who have transvaluated this, a crone is one who should be an example of strength, courage, and wisdom. For women who are on the journey of radical being, the lives of witches, of the great hags of our hidden history, are deeply intertwined with our own process. As we write/live our own story, we are uncovering their history, creating hagography and hagology. Unlike the saints of Christianity, who must by definition be dead, hags live. Women traveling into feminist time/space are creating hagocracy, the place where we govern. To govern is to steer, to pilot. We are learning, individually and together, to pilot the time/spaceships of our voyage. The vehicles of our voyage may be any creative enterprises that further women's process. The point is that they should be governed by the witch within, the hag within. In living/writing hagography, it is important to recognize that those who live in the tradition of the great hags will become haggard. This term, like so many others, must be understood in its radical sense. Although haggard is commonly used to describe one who has a worn or emaciated appearance, this was not its original or primary meaning. Applied to a hawk, it means, untamed. So-called obsolete meanings given in Merriam-Webster include, intractable, willful, wanton, and, unchaste. The second meaning is, wild in appearance, as A, of the eyes, wild and staring, B, of a person, wild-eyed, end quote. Only after these meanings do we find the idea of, a worn or emaciated appearance. As a noun, haggard has an, obsolete meaning, an intractable person, especially a woman reluctant to wooing, end quote. Haggard writing is by and for haggard women, those who are intractable, willful, wanton, unchaste, and especially those who are reluctant to yield to wooing. It belongs to the tradition of those who refuse to assume the woes of wooed women, who cast off these woes as unworthy of hags, of harpies. Haggard women are not man-wooed. As Furies, women in the tradition of the great hags reject the curse of compromise. The great hags of history, when their lives have not been prematurely terminated, have lived to be crones. Crones are the long-lasting ones. They are the survivors of the perpetual witch-craze of patriarchy, the survivors of the burning times. In living/writing, feminists are recording and creating the history of crones. Women who identify with the great crones may wish to call our writing of women's history chronography. It is also appropriate to think of our writing in this tradition as chronology. Chronology, generally speaking, means an arrangement, as of data, events, in order of time of occurrence or appearance. In a specific sense, however, it refers to, the classification of archaeological sites or prehistoric periods of culture, end quote. Since the history of hags and crones is truly prehistoric in relation to patriarchal history, being prior both in time and in appearance, haggard women should consider that our chronology is indeed our chronology. In writing/recording/creating chronography, and in studying our own prehistoric chronology, we are unmasking deceptive patriarchal history, rendering it obsolete. Women who refuse to be wooed by patriarchal scholarship can conjure the chronicles of the great crones, four-sisters of our present and future selves. In Greek mythology, the crow is an oracular bird. Whether or not an etymological connection can be demonstrated, the association between crones and oracular utterances is natural and obvious. As unwooed women unearth more of our tradition, we can begin to hear and understand our own oracles, which have been caricatured as the, screeching of, old crows. Hagographers perceive the hilarious hypocrisy of his history. At first this may be difficult, for when the whole is hypocrisy, the parts may not initially appear untrue. To put it another way, when everything is bizarre, nothing seems bizarre. Hags are women who struggle to see connections. Hags risk a great deal, if necessary, everything, knowing that there is only nothing to lose. Hags may rage and roar, but they do not titter. Webster defines titter as follows, quote, "To give vent to laughter one is seeking to suppress. Laugh lightly or in a subdued manner. Laugh in a nervous, affected, or restrained manner, especially at a high pitch, and with short catches of the voice." End quote. Self-loathing ladies titter. Hags and harpies roar. Fembots titter at themselves when daddy turns the switch. They totter when he pulls the string. They titter especially at the spinning of spinsters, whom they have been trained to see as dizzy dames. Daddy's little titterers try to intimidate women struggling for greatness. This is what they are made for and paid for. There is only one taboo for titterers. They must never laugh seriously at father, only at his jokes. There is nothing like the sound of women really laughing. The roaring laughter of women is like the roaring of the eternal sea. Hags can cackle and roar at themselves, but more and more one hears them roaring at the reversal that is patriarchy, that monstrous jock's joke, the male mothers' club that gives birth only to putrefaction and deception. One can hear pain and perhaps cynicism in the laughter of hags who witness the spectacle of male mothers, murderers, dismembering a planet they have already condemned to death. But this laughter is the one true hope, for as long as it is audible there is evidence that someone is seeing through the dirty joke. It is in this hope that this hagography is written.